Welcome back to another episode of the Lake Protectors podcast. Today we are going to be meeting with two folks from the Jefferson Project, Mark Lucius, and a little bit later we will be meeting with Maria Pelusi.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you doing today?
Oh, well. How about yourself?
I'm pretty good. So we're going to jump right in. We're going to get a little bit about your background, and then we're immediately going to start talking about the Jefferson Project because I think there's endless questions about JP and what you guys do. So why don't you start and just give us a little bit about your background and how you ended up working here at Lake George?
Sure. Yeah, so I went to school down in Florida. I'm born and raised in Florida.
Okay.
Moved up here after grad school, so I got a master's degree in environmental science. Moved up here in 2017 to work on the Jefferson Project. And since then, it's been a great experience working with all of the great technology we're going to talk about on the project, all the great engineers and scientists that work on the project. And right now, my title is senior software engineer, so a bit of divergence from my training in grad school. But I really came to love the technology of the project and really started to focus on that during my time here. So that's sort of how I ended up here up in upstate New York.
Now, the Jefferson Project has called Lake George the smartest lake in the world. Let's just start with base level. Like, what is the Jefferson Project?
Sure. Well, let's start with sort of the name of the project, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people ask that. It's called the Jefferson Project because of a famous quote by Thomas Jefferson about Lake George, really remarking on the clarity of the water and the beauty of the lake. And after a report came out from the Freshwater Institute, where I work now, about sort of the declining health of the lake over the past 30 years when that was released, the Jefferson Project was really brought into focus as a way to increase the technology and the sophistication of the monitoring and the research going on at the lake in order to really help reverse some of those trends that they were seeing and raise awareness, working with people like you and the LGA about these issues so that we can potentially reverse and fix them.
Okay. Now, who's involved with the Jefferson Project?
Yeah, so it really started as a collaboration between RPI, focused main campus down in Troy, New York, but they have a field station up in Bolton Landing. And then at the time, it was the Fund for Lake George, now the LGA, really doing the policy and outreach aspect. And then IBM was also brought on board, really focused on the technology that they could bring to the project and sort of raise the sophistication of the techniques that were being used.
Okay. Yeah. So what makes Lake George the smartest lake in the world?
Well, I think there's a few things. I think it starts with the sensor network, which I think we'll dig into. So that's state-of-the-art sensor platforms from our vertical profilers, tributary monitoring, and weather stations, but then also bringing in high-resolution modeling. So this is a lot of compute power, a lot of sophisticated computing that goes into running models of weather and runoff and circulation of the lake at high resolution, right? So 333-meter grid size, which is sort of unheard of for this sort of modeling. And then bring in, the great research and engineering that goes into all of that. That's really the smart aspect of it and how all of this works together. And I think we'll get into details on some of that. But,
yeah, let's talk about the sensor network. So the sensor network has 3 different components to it, right?
Yeah, you could say that.
I'm sure there's actually millions of components to it.
Right.
But that boils down to 3 main.
It does. And these are the things that people see and people are aware of, and it's sort of the edge of the network, if you will. So this is where the sensors are. This is where the data is actually being collected. These are the things that people see out on the water all the time, the vertical profilers. So those are moored out in different spots in the lake. And they collect water quality data throughout the entire water column of the lake. And these are very visible. People love the vertical profilers out there. If we move a profiler, we'll get calls from residents saying hey, where'd the profiler go? We like that thing. And then weather stations are also pretty visible. Some of them are out on the rock islands out on the lake. And then the tributary monitoring stations, those are looking at water quality and quantity coming in from the watershed, which, as the research has shown and limnology in general knows, it really starts in the watershed. Yeah. So it's really important to monitor that too.
Totally. Now, how many different stations and sensors are set up around the lake?
Good question. So the tributary monitoring stations are sort of fixed locations. Same with the weather station. And I think between the two of those, there's about 20, 18, 20. But the vertical profilers are a little bit different, right? So it's essentially a little platform that we moor in different places. And these moorings can be moved, shifted based on research questions and what we want to know. So those could be anywhere from, I think we've had up to 5 in the lake at any different year. And it just depends on what we're really focused on that particular year.
How do they work? I mean, we talk about it,
Right.
How is it getting data from the tributary that it might be placed at back to you guys?
Yeah, so you can think of it as having a sensor, an instrument in the water or in the air or in the soil even. And we have a small computer basically at every station. This is what we call an IoT node. So Internet of Things is what IoT stands for. And the node is really just a little computer that all the sensors are connected to. And we can control how the data is collected from those sensors, how quickly. We can dynamically control things like how fast they sample. And once the data has been collected and stored on the computer, then there's some additional technology that continuously moves that data from that small computer to a database hosted at RPI. And then from there, let me not skip over too much here, but on the IoT node, there's also things like edge analytics. So all the data that comes in real time is getting analyzed, looking for outliers, looking for QC problems, things like that. And then from there, move to that database where we have a web portal, an analytics platform where we can visualize data, download data, monitor things in real time. And that's sort of the central hub where our researchers can grab data, pair it with other sorts of data, whether it's the model data or external sources of data, and really crunch the numbers.
Okay. So say there was, on a summer day, we get 4 inches of rain in a short time span, and you have a lot of stormwater going into a stream. That's something you guys would see right
absolutely.
away.
Starting with the precipitation, you would see it falling
from the weather
stations.
station.
Yep. And then we monitor the level of streams, so we can see in the hydrograph that nice upward movement, and then followed by a slow decline, a typical stormwater pulse. And then we can even see it at the vertical profilers. So depending on how close they are to one of the tributaries, that pulse of runoff, apologies, I just hit the mic, that pulse of runoff can make its way, kind of follow the thermocline, which, sorry to use the jargon there, but the water can be stratified, and the water coming in from the stream will sort of hug that thermocline, and it can flow all the way out to the VP, showing up as a pulse in the middle of the lake.
That's fascinating.
We can track it the whole way. Yeah.
Start of storm to intrusion into the lake.
Eventual mixing, yep.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Now, how many data points are we talking about? Like, say, in the instance of one singular storm from weather station all the way to vertical profiler, I assume it's like thousands of data points.
Probably more like millions.
Millions?
Yeah. So the tributaries and the weather station are collecting data, and they're really small potatoes, really, compared to the vertical profilers. So the weather station might have rain data and wind data and air temperature, barometric pressure collected at maybe once a minute.
Okay.
And same with the tributary station. It's got a water quality sensor in the water and a pressure transducer to see how much water is moving down the stream. And those, again, are usually collecting data about once per minute. I mentioned that dynamic sampling that can kick in from time to time, but in general, it's about once per minute. But the vertical profilers is really where a lot of the data comes from. And that's for a couple reasons. One, the profiling itself, we collect data from that instrument, that profiling sonde, at 4 times a second. So something like 16, 17 different variables, 4 times a second. And then we also have things called acoustic Doppler current profilers. And so these are acoustic sensors that use the Doppler effect. They send sound waves down into the water, and it bounces off particles. And those particles are typically moving with the water. And based on how the echo or the response sound comes back to the instrument, it can determine the velocity in these very discrete bins because of how the timing differs as the sound goes and then comes back.
That's so interesting.
And so those can collect gigabytes of data per day. So I think they sample typically at 2 times a second, and each sample you'll get 4 components of velocity, 4 components of the return echo, at something like 100 different bins in the water. Wow. So just tons and tons of data.
Who is who's characterized with reading all of this data? Or is that all in tune with the computer models must be doing some of it for you, but then is there one human, are there 100 humans who then analyze it beyond that?
So it's definitely used for the modeling. That instrument in particular is really critical for the circulation modeling, the hydrodynamic modeling. And so that model really, it has sort of a boundary box and some starting points, but then from there it's all this math and this process that goes into saying how each grid in the lake, and really it's a cube, right? Because there's also a depth component, is being influenced by its neighbor and then how it's influencing its neighbor sort of thing. And so we can model the velocity and the movement of the water throughout the lake, but then we have the actual instrument too at a certain spot that can tell us what the true velocity is. So we can use the two and we can tune the model to sort of fit reality. And that's what's been going on for 10 years now to really perfect the hydrodynamic model of Lake George.
And you guys know all of the circulation throughout the lake.
Right.
I saw one of the most interesting things, and I love to look at it, and but it's showing the various depths of all the lake. What is that map?
A bathymetric map.
Bathymetric map.
Right.
That
was a study that we paid a company called Substructure to come and perform. And they have some really sophisticated sonar and a boat that's really decked out just for that task. And they spent a long time just going back and forth over the lake. And then they coupled that with LiDAR data. So that's aerial data as well, especially for the shallow areas and up the hillsides to create a very high resolution, something like 4 terabytes worth of data. That is essentially a map that tells you how deep the lake is, all about the watershed as well, so the elevation. And that's also critical to that circulation model because we need a very precise bathymetric map to go with that very precise model.
Well, and to inform all of where you're going to place these,
absolutely, yep,
all of these sensor network.
Yeah, and so some of that data has showed places where we might expect interactions with the lake bed, with whether it's surface waves or seiche waves, internal seiche. And how that might contribute to things like nutrient loading, harmful algal blooms, stuff like that. So that's really influenced our positioning in some of our platforms, like the one that's in Harris Bay this year. That's been a sort of a hot spot for harmful algal blooms. And we think particularly because of both movement on the surface, so the blooms can kind of aggregate in that bay, but also potentially resuspension of sediment and resting cells of cyanobacteria can get reactivated due to wave energy basically on the bottom there.
Are there certain threats, things that are of higher concern today that were not 10 years ago plus when the Jefferson Project first began?
Yeah, good question. So the project really, I mentioned the 30-year report earlier, that really had a focus on things like road salt, declining water clarity, and a couple of those have sort of stabilized, road salt in particular, and I think a lot of that's some of that sort of mass balance equation, but also a lot of it's some of the work that's been done by the LGA, working with local municipalities to reduce the amount of salt that's used or maybe the type of salt that's used, educating the drivers, that sort of thing. So that's been a real win for the project and for Lake George. Harmful algal blooms, though, that's been sort of since 2020. The first bloom really occurred, according to the DEC, in 2020 in the fall, a time when we don't usually associate cyanobacteria blooms occurring. And ever since then, we've really been trying to get a handle on why are they going to continue? Was it a one-off thing? And they have persisted for a couple years after that, but then last year we didn't have any. So it's really now we're trying to figure out why. What's different about last year? Was this some really critical nutrient pulse that happened in 2020 and it's sort of been waning since? So that's been a real focus of ours the past few years. But then there's other threats too. We talked about stormwater runoff, and that's been a focus of the LGA and ours as well. So we're really trying to improve our research in that respect. And then there's new invasives that we're starting to be concerned about, like the spiny water flea. That I think that was first discovered almost 10 years ago, but it really
2012. Yes.
Yeah. And so that really, there was a few years where they saw more than usual, but then most of the time between about 2012 and now, it's been pretty dormant. We haven't seen much of it, but now in the last couple of years, it's really taken off. And
last year was wild. Last year, mid-July, like the educators out on the floating classroom were sending me photos saying, we aren't really finding much plankton, but we are finding this crazy little creature and, sending me microscopic photos, and it's the spiny water flea, which we had seen before, but it was always in August. And last year, I mean, the lake heated up so quickly last year. Like by mid-July, it was almost 80 degrees, if not.
And I think just looking at some of our data, the lake became swimmable, as we call it, which is about 20 degrees C, about 68 degrees.
Okay.
Almost 10 days earlier than usual.
Chilly swimmable.
I'm from Florida. That's way too cold for me.
Yeah.
It needs to start with a 7.
Okay.
60s is too cold. 70s is all right.
We went in last year when it was in the 60s, and yeah, I was like teeth chattering, but you hunker down and do it. It's Lake George, right? Any opportunity to get like you, it's genuinely
July and August for me.
Only.
Yeah, that's it.
Some August days get really chilly. Or by the end of August, you're talking, back into the 60s. Well, I guess it depends on the weather. So when we talk about harmful algal blooms, though, you guys, I know part of that comes from the weather modeling because there's certain things that are more optimal for a potential bloom, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So we talked about some of those process models, circulation, weather, and runoff. But now we've started to incorporate and sort of operationalize HABs forecasting.
Yeah.
And so something that we noticed with the blooms in Lake George is that they would really occur in periods of increased stability in water column. And that usually occurs during calm days and warmer days. And there's something called Schmidt stability that is a single number that you can use to understand the stability of the water. And when a lake is stratified, you have these 2 layers, a warmer layer and a cooler layer below. And when that number is higher, basically those 2 layers are more resistant to mixing. And so what we can do is use a weather forecast to predict, is that stability going to decrease or increase? And what we typically see before a bloom or a surface aggregation is a decrease in stability.
Okay.
Maybe from a strong wind event, a strong storm, followed by, a warm, calm period.
Okay.
The idea potentially being that that storm is bringing in nutrients or kicking up algae cells before they are then able to come to the surface during that stabilized period.
Yeah.
And so the forecast really looks at that and is focused on that stability of the water column number to make its predictions.
Are there ever times where it looks like a clear day and you guys get notified from the weather station that like, oh no, suddenly the sky is about to open up and dump rain? Because weather has seemed somewhat unpredictable, at least to me. I'm not looking at this data, but like in the summertime, it might appear to be what's going to be a gorgeous day.
Yeah.
And the boat calls me and says, there's suddenly this massive storm that kicked up.
Yeah. Summertime is definitely thunderstorms, right?
Yeah.
So that's where we're going to get
and
more
like torrential rain in a very short time span, which to me seems that has changed over the last, 10, 20 years. Not that, of course, we would have these harsh storms, but like the unpredictability of it, I guess.
I think that's a global phenomenon.
Yeah, for sure.
The increased frequency and severity of storms.
Yeah.
And that's sort of a climate change effect that scientists have noticed over the past few decades. And I don't think Lake George is immune to that. So stronger storms. I think one of our weather stations out on one of the rock piles at Whale Rock last year, summer storm, wind speed was measured at 86 miles per hour.
Whoa.
So that's hurricane force winds.
That is, and thinking of like the boats and the people out on the lake at that time,
camping
if they didn't know, and camping on the islands.
Yeah.
Wow, that would take a tent right down.
Oh, yeah.
That would be bad.
Well, I think a lot of trees did come down on the islands. I remember seeing crews out there doing a lot of work to get them cleaned up.
The wind is stronger, or at least, again, seems to be, which I'm sure you guys would also see.
Yep.
Now, in real time, you guys have this data like present day. Are you always analyzing it based on as well, like, do things go back to when all of these sensors were first installed and like the progression of how things have changed or not changed?
Yeah, so the sensor network is really, and we do have a long record now. It's gone, on for 10 years at some locations, but the sensor network is really focused on high resolution, singular events sometimes where we're like, that was a cool event. Let's really dig into the high frequency data. But it is now, because of such a long time we've collected the data, it can be used for sort of trend analysis, right? So is there a trend over the past 10 years in parameter X or Y or whatever? But that's where sort of the limitations of the sensor network can come in, where we can't measure everything with sensors. Right. And so the lake surveys, and I mentioned the 30-year report, that was really based on a lot of the survey work that was done on the water, collecting real samples, taken back to a lab, measuring things that can't be measured with sensors.
Right.
And so that work has continued. That's where a lot of the trend analysis on important nutrients, important minerals, anions, cations, comes into play. So if you're really looking for a long trend, a long time period to make any determination on are things changing, increasing, decreasing, that data is going to be a little bit better suited for it. And so it complements our sensor network very well.
Yeah.
Because you can bring in these samples to the lab, measure them for really critical components, things that fuel algae blooms, for example, nitrogen and phosphorus, but then pair that with the high frequency sensor data, and you really get this complete picture.
Right. Okay, we've mentioned the high frequency sensor data. Can you what is it? Is that the 4 seconds of data, or I'm sorry, 4 data points per second, or is it somehow faster, more data?
No, so that's 4 times a second is, I think, probably the fastest we collect for environmental data. There's some other sensors like some of our onboard components of our vertical profilers that look at like the movement of it. That goes something like 860 measurements per second. But that's really not focused on the environment. So we call high frequency anything that's higher than about 10 or 15 minute intervals.
Okay.
But then ultra high frequency is anything faster than once per second.
Okay.
So that's where
those are the vertical profilers.
That's right. Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
Has there ever been anything where it's like, I'm just picturing like I think I'm picturing Twister, where like there's a storm and like it's all hands on deck. Do you guys ever have moments where you're like, we got to go on the lake, we got to do?
Yeah, I think the biggest event that I can remember where we all got together and we got on the water immediately. We had late night meetings. Like, what do we do? How do we, collect data to understand this better? Was really the first surface aggregations, the first algal blooms back in 2020.
Okay.
I just remember a lot of, I don't want to say panic, but a lot of, we were just really trying to make sure that we understood this sort of first time event.
Right.
So getting out there and collecting samples for just, I think, daily for multiple weeks after it occurred, moving platforms to the areas that it occurred.
Right.
And then again, having meetings every night saying, what did we collect today? What do we need to collect tomorrow to make sure we understand this event? So that's, to me, and I've only been here since 2017, was really sort of the biggest moment that you could describe in that way.
That was the first confirmed. Are there any thoughts that maybe there had been blooms on the lake prior to 2020, but maybe they just weren't seen?
Yeah, so I think the awareness of harmful algal blooms has increased. And so people are better at spotting them.
Well, and regionally too, because they have popped up quite significantly for years in some other local water bodies.
But then I think we have some aerial photography that was taken back in the 60s and 70s that potentially have shown surface aggregations. And, there was actually a decline shown in the 30-year report of total phosphorus that could be, because I think they banned phosphorus detergents. Fertilizers in the lake at that time. So it's quite possible that people saw algal blooms back in the 60s, 70s, didn't really know what they were, didn't point them out, didn't find them odd. And so we went through that period where things improved, and then we might potentially, unfortunately, be going the other way, whether it's due to stormwater runoff or urbanization.
Development,
yeah.
Are there, apart from road salt, are there any other threats, whatnot, just general data on the lake that has seen a increase for the better since the Jefferson Project's been? Or is it just all downhill?
No, it's not all downhill. A lot of the critical nutrients have sort of plateaued.
Okay.
Water clarity is stable.
Water clarity is good.
Yeah, that's what makes Lake George really, such a popular recreational spot is its water clarity. And that's been stable as well.
Yeah.
So those are good things, good news.
Are you guys measuring water clarity? You're only doing it via the vertical profilers, or do you guys get out there with Secchi discs and do it that way as well, just to confirm, I guess?
Yeah. So the vertical profilers can give us something called turbidity.
Okay.
And so that's essentially how many particulates are in the water, small particles. But the profiler doesn't collect things like incoming solar radiation. And that's because it shades itself, right? So you have a platform that would shade a sensor that does that. And so that's where those surveys come into play. So our team goes out there. They do Secchi discs, but really it's sort of a very antiquated technique. you can have 3 people take a measurement and all get different numbers, sort of thing.
Happens on the floating classroom every day.
That's right.
We say we want a range of like 1 meter or so. And there is always one kid that's like, I saw 27 meters. We're like, these are 15-meter lines.
Exactly. Yep. So we have instruments that are a little more accurate, that are really measuring the incoming radiation as you lower it throughout the water column.
Okay.
And so you can get a singular number. It creates a profile of measurements, but it gives you a singular number, the light extinction coefficient, it's called, that you can use to more accurately track light penetration over time.
Okay. That's really cool. Any other like final thoughts that you want to add in today? What's your favorite part of the lake? We love to ask this.
Gotcha. So I love the Hewlett's Landing area.
Same.
So it's a great spot. Great views, nice bays, good for swimming and, wading and fishing. So,
but only in July and August for swimming.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for coming today. We are going to chat with your coworker, Maria Pelusi, here in just a moment, but we appreciate you coming out and educating us on the Jefferson Project, and we'll definitely be working with you here all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much, Mark. All right. Now we are joined by Maria Pelusi, also from the Jefferson Project, and we're going to chat a little bit more about the sensors and where they are all located. But first, welcome. Thank you for coming along today.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Can you give us a little bit about your background too?
Yeah, sure. So I did my master's at Clarkson University.
Okay.
It's up in way northern New York.
Yep.
So I did water quality research on the St. Lawrence River and on the surrounding watershed, and I was looking at spatial and temporal water quality and how it changed throughout the river and also in the surrounding tributaries. And that's where I first got introduced to water quality sensors. I had a much smaller scale of sensors. I was using like 6 sensors. And using just like basic limnology tactics to study water quality. And then in 2023, I started the Jefferson Project. So I've been here about 2 years. I'm a senior research specialist, which doesn't really mean much in terms of like my tasks, but I kind of have a hand in everything.
You seem to always be out and about, running around.
Yeah, which has been really nice because I feel like it's made me very well-rounded. And I'm constantly learning. It's definitely a lot different than what I expected. I just came in as a sensor technician. And basically I'm in charge of like sensor inventories and maintaining the sensor network on the hardware side, electrical side, helping Mark with the software side and everything like that. But I also help with surveys. I help run tributary monitoring surveys as well. And also just learning data quality analysis, data cleaning, organization, anything like that. So it's been a really great learning experience. And I feel like I'm still like learning from everything.
Every day. You always have to be learning. If you're not learning, you're just stagnant,
Exactly. And I feel like going from like a river background to a lake has been really interesting too, because I feel like a lake is kind of like a big whirlpool, and like the river, it's like constantly moving in one direction. So it's definitely different.
A lake is like fluctuating up a little more. Now, how often do these sensors have to be maintained or tended to?
So it depends. The lake is pretty clear, so the water quality sensors there usually don't get fouled that badly. But in the tributary monitoring stations, water quality sensors can get fouled pretty easily. Specifically the optical sensors. So we might have to go out and change sensors at certain streams that are a little more turbid, like Westbrook or Eastbrook. And we also have pH and chloride sensors that tend to drift. So we usually have to recalibrate them every 2 months and go switch them out to maintain data quality.
Now, what does the optical sensor capture? We're going to dive into all like what each station is capturing, but like at the tributary stations, the optical sensor, what's that looking at?
So we have a few different optical sensors. One of them is turbidity. One of them is FDOM, or fluorescent dissolved organic matter. And we have total algae sensors as well that are at East and Westbrook. So those are looking at phycocyanin and also chlorophyll, which is a product of photosynthetic organisms. How
many tributary stations are there again?
We had one struck by lightning last year, so there's around 11 or 12 right now, but we're getting the English Brook tributary station back up and running pretty soon.
Zap it, fry it?
So something happened with the grounding wire didn't correctly work. So basically zapped our water quality sensors and electronics box. It was actually really interesting. You could open the electronics box and it was like ash. So one of our interns actually discovered it and we were like, oh no.
Did they discover immediately like, hey, this just stopped?
So we have a network monitor, so we can see when data is streaming and like what different sensors are measuring and if they're streaming to our database. Sorry. And so we noticed that the English Brook tributary station was down. Well, there was like, a red square, like, oh, it's not streaming data. So we had an intern go out there. And I guess he called Mark in like a panic and was like, there's like ash in the electronics box and
on fire, smoking.
Yeah. So we've had actually quite a few lightning strikes, but never, I think, this bad.
Okay.
Because we've optimized how our stations are so that like lightning is diverted away from the station. But this one, I think we just got unlucky. So yeah, but that one
happen.
Yeah, it happens, and we have insurance, so everything is fine. So that will be up and running this summer.
Okay. So. Now, how were the stream stations selected?
I believe that in 2014-15, they were selected based on just the biggest tributaries of Lake George and what could be selected to capture the most input from the watershed into the lake.
So the 8 major. When we do our educational programs, we always talk about there being 8 major streams that flow into the lake. I assume it's probably.
I think we have around like 11 or 12. Yeah, there's probably like the 8 major ones, and then a few others,
extras. Maybe where there's more development or potential for something.
I think we tried our best to get like full coverage around the lake.
Okay,
like there's pretty much a stream station like. And everywhere you look on like ultimate other sides of the lake.
Yeah, from the village up to Tai. Now, how many weather stations are there, and what is that capturing?
So I believe there's 5 weather stations. I could be misremembering.
Okay.
But we have 2 that are out on the lake.
Yep.
And those capture wind data, PAR data, which is photosynthetic active radiation. So that is just measuring the amount of radiation coming in that like photosynthetic organisms use.
Okay.
Also precipitation data, humidity data, snow if there ever is any, or hail, which we rarely see hail, but it's mostly snow and rain.
Yeah.
And then at the weather stations on the edges of the lake, measure the same things like wind precipitation, but they also have a water temperature sensor in some of them. So it's a little less complex than tributary stations, but it's still good to get that coverage of weather data around the lake.
Yeah, that seems to be like the start of the progression of the data for the other stations. Yeah. Now, the vertical profilers, those are the platforms that are placed around the lake. They used to be yellow. Now they're nice bright orange. So easy to spot.
Yeah.
Let's talk about those. So how many you just placed them last week in the lake?
Yeah, so we actually just deployed 2 vertical profilers in Harris Bay and Caldwell Basin last week.
Did you have to get in the water to do it? We know Mark didn't.
Like in the water, swimming? Yeah. No.
Oh, okay.
We had to get our hands wet, but
okay, that's manageable.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad.
Okay, so where are they located this year?
So we have one in Harris Bay, and then we have one in the Caldwell Basin.
So just 2 so far?
Just two this year.
Will there be a third?
It depends
or will there
on
be any others.
It depends on if research questions develop. If we want to study something else like storm intrusion, or something happens in one of the bays, and we want to look more into it, then we could deploy something else.
The Harris Bay one is looking for harmful algal blooms?
Yeah, so that we have it in the original location where the first reported surface aggregation was. So we just have been monitoring it since then to see what else happens.
Have there been other blooms in Harris Bay beyond that first one?
I honestly can't quite remember. I think the most recent one we had was in Basin Bay.
Okay.
But we didn't really have any reported last year.
Yeah, so last year was interesting. The Caldwell Basin vertical profiler, what is that?
So, right there we have it in a kind of a deeper hole of the lake, and we're trying to monitor deep water hypoxia, or basically depleted oxygen at the bottom of the lake. And so this is caused by decay of organisms that float down to the bottom, as well as sediment. But we've noticed that it's kind of been getting not exactly worse, but it's lasting longer. So like we see this deep water hypoxia pretty much the entire season, and we're trying to understand if it's because of shorter winters or less ice cover or something that's happening in the lake.
Right.
So yeah, we've been trying to monitor the last few years.
The lake froze for the first time this year in 2 or 3 years, right?
Yeah. As far as I know, last year we didn't really have any consistent ice cover. And
or the year before.
Yeah. And I moved here in 2023, so I had never seen the lake frozen. So this past winter was my first time actually walking on the lake. And we did through the ice sampling, which was really cool. But yeah, it was very interesting.
And I'm curious if any data will be, you'll see like no ice to ice this year and like how that changes, I guess, or if it even does. Yeah. Now, how does the vertical profiler work? It's a probe that goes to the lake bottom, right?
Yeah. So basically we have a water quality sonde, and that on the sonde are multiple probes, and those are the things that measure like turbidity, total algae, FDOM, temperature, things like that. And basically it just, depending on the depth of the site, it goes usually within a meter of the bottom.
Okay.
And it goes in instances of like, I think it's like half a meter, and then it stops, takes a measurement, half a meter, probably I think less than that, honestly, depending on the site. And it takes high frequency data, each of those measurements. So we have these really detailed visualizations of data throughout the water column.
And it's constantly running.
It's constantly going 24 hours a day unless something breaks.
How often do you have to service check on the vertical profilers?
I feel like I have a very skewed view of this because the year that I started, things were really like constantly breaking.
Okay.
And I don't know if I was cursed or something, but it was actually a really good experience because I learned how things worked and how to fix things. But I would say we usually have to go out between like 5 or 6 times a summer to work on vertical profilers. But with each year, we're perfecting things and changing things that we know are more likely to fail. They're very complex machines that have a lot of moving parts. So there's a lot of points for possible failure. So things are bound to break at some point, even if like they run on solar panels. So if it's a cloudy day and the power's not really great, then batteries can die, and that can lead to equipment failure. So we have to be like constantly vigilant about these things.
Has a vertical profiler ever been struck by lightning?
No, but they have been hit by a boat.
Oh no!
Yeah,
I'm actually not. I mean, I'd like to say I'm surprised, but in spite of the fluorescent orange color, like. Yeah. Sometimes people just don't see things.
This might have been when they had yellow pontoons.
Yeah.
The past 2 generations have been custom built by RPI. Okay. So our first round of vertical profilers were off the shelf from YSI. And then we wanted to just customize them to make them more fitting to what we wanted to study.
What is YSI?
It's a water quality instrument company. Okay. I think they're under Xylem.
Okay.
So they make these equipment for different lakes. Like you can probably go on Lake Champlain. They probably have something like that.
The first iterations were that. But now, who's building them? Are you guys building these?
No, so we have engineers
down at RPI.
Who I think the latest generation was built like 2 or 3 years ago, and they have the bright orange pontoons. But I'm pretty sure the one that was hit had yellow pontoons.
Okay, so maybe orange is just.
Maybe it's better. I don't know. Yeah. But for lightning, the vertical profilers do have a grounding wire that goes into the water. So if there ever is lightning, it usually gets.
Here's hoping that never happens. Yeah. They are very expensive pieces of equipment that people work very hard on at all times.
Yeah, they're very sensitive.
Okay. So you guys will be out there pretty much all summer and analyzing all this data. And then the whole model of this project has also been brought to another lake, right?
Yeah. So since 2020, we've been basically trying to apply the same model to Chautauqua Lake, which is out in western New York. It's kind of near Lake Erie.
Okay.
So the problems that are at Chautauqua Lake are actually a lot different than Lake George. I think it's just a different landscape. It's very flat. There's not a lot of mountains around, and it's heavily influenced by Lake Erie and other factors like that. So they've been having some trouble with harmful algal blooms, and I think for actually quite a long time. So
I've seen some and I've seen some presentations that show like the Chautauqua bloom versus like what the Lake
Yeah,
George
it's kind of funny to me when people
comparisons are
panic
huge.
at Lake George.
Yeah.
I'm like, you should really go out to Chautauqua Lake because it can get it's pretty like scary. It's like, this is the lake that people love and they want to swim in, and it's like people view the same way that lake that they do is Lake George. Like, this is where they get their drinking water and things like that.
Chautauqua is also drinking water?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good like perspective though to say like, things can change quickly, and like what is seemingly beautiful drinking water with few blooms could, what can happen if you don't do anything or if everything just stops.
Right.
Yeah.
So basically, we're trying to apply the Lake George Smart Lake model to Chautauqua Lake. So we've been deploying vertical profilers there since 2020. Okay. And as of last year, we built 6 tributary stations.
Wow.
Along with a small monitoring station at the Chautauqua River outlet. And then the goal is to have 2 weather stations out there as well to kind of create the same type of model. It's a smaller lake, so there doesn't have to be as much resolution as there is on Lake George. Like, we have 12 stations. But yeah, ultimately want to try and help lake management out there as well.
Similarly to how you guys are doing it here at Lake George. That's awesome.
Yeah, so the project is growing. Our team is growing.
What's the next lake? I don't want to get ahead of you.
I would love to go to Lake Tahoe, but
oh yeah,
I guess it's really depends on like
you'd be driving cross country with a VP.
That would be tough, but it would be nice to go somewhere warm. Maybe we could go somewhere in the south. I don't know.
There you go. Is there anything now that the station is set up out at Chautauqua? Is all of that data going back to the Freshwater Institute? Or is it the folks out there monitoring it if there's any type of instance where they need to be like boots on the ground?
Yeah.
How's that work?
So we have our sensor network pretty much set up the same way. It's collecting data on the IoT nodes like Mark mentioned, and then it's getting streamed to our database. So we're viewing the data in real time. And we also just hired new technicians, so they're going to be out there as the boots on the ground to go and visit stations. And again, these stations are new, and we also don't know a lot about these streams because we haven't been monitoring them.
Right.
So we're trying to just wait and see what the data looks like to know if it's like, if this sensor fouled, or is this just how this water is?
Right.
So yeah, we view the data and look at the data and analyze it in the same way. We just have different people out there looking at the stations.
Great
physically.
for comparison, too. Do you guys ever look at the data between and compare Lake George to Chautauqua?
We kind of just started going over the data. It's hard to make a comparison because, again, we don't really know how these streams behave. Like, it seems like they're a lot more reactive. Like, they are more influenced by storms and things like that because it's such a smaller watershed and there's not like it's more developed than Lake George. Like, I think, so
that would make sense with, I guess, the nutrient loading leading to harmful algal blooms. Lake George is unique with its steep watershed, but all going back to the formation of it. What's your favorite part of the lake?
Honestly, probably anywhere in the north end. I just like love how high the mountains are and everything like that. Like, I remember like my first day on the job when I was out on the boat, and just like being on a lake surrounded by mountains is just like it's a very cool experience. I mean, I grew up on the river where it's like flat, and I always loved the river.
The St. Lawrence River?
St. Lawrence River.
Okay.
Yeah. But then coming to Lake George, I was like, oh, it's like I love water and I love mountains, and they're together, and it's just beautiful.
Had you been to Lake George before accepting the position?
No, I think that on my drive up here for my interview, I was like, wow. Like, and we joke because we kind of like, you kind of get used to it and you don't appreciate it as much anymore. So like when we drive around the lake to do stream monitoring, and it's like, there's some really great views along the lake. And it's like, I still find myself like looking and be like, oh, wow, that's really beautiful. But it's funny, like I bring my parents here and they're like, wow. It's beautiful.
Yeah, on a crystal clear day, nothing beats it. Yeah. Did you know that there are allegedly, please confirm or deny, eels in Lake George?
Eels? No, I didn't know that.
We discovered this a few months ago. We saw a like Facebook comment somewhere picture And it looked like picture proof up in the outlet. Be on the lookout for that this summer if you guys are up in Thai.
Oh, God. All right.
Just
I'm not
add one more thing to your list of things to look for, track.
Are there like lamprey in Lake George?
No lampreys.
Oh, thank
No
God.
lampreys. Thankfully, they are in Lake Champlain. No lampreys in Lake George, but we're looking for a confirmation about eels by someone who has seen.
Well, that's nightmare fuel, so I'm going to avoid eels.
I'm not a big fan. There's this crazy article, though, talking about, I think it was in the early 1900s, eels getting into water lines down in Troy, so down near RPI, and up in Ticonderoga, like stopping factory work for days because there were eels in the plumbing.
Good for them.
That sounds, So just be on the lookout for it.
Okay.
Thank you so much for coming
thank
today.
You for having me.
We are going to have both of you guys at our Lake Protector Summit, which is on May 15th at the Courtyard Lake George. Dr. Kevin Rose is going to be giving the keynote address, so he's going to be diving into some of this information as well, also some new information, but you guys will be there, and anyone can come chat with you about the Jefferson Project and all the work you guys do.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much, Maria. We appreciate it. And we'll be back soon for another episode. Have a good day. The Lake Protectors Podcast is a production of the Lake George Association. To check out the work that the LGA is doing, follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Lake George Association. You can also visit our website at lakegeorgeassociation.org. This episode was produced by Jacqueline Mignot. If you'd like to hear more, follow us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts.